Okay, so thank you for coming, everyone, and thank you for inviting me here. So this is going to be a talk about Portfolio, a tool that I built over the past few months and that we're using at my place of work as of now. I already talked enough about myself, I think, but yeah, I'm Christian Johansen, a developer in Oslo, Norway. I've been doing web applications for a really long time. And I was a front-end developer yeah, since the beginning of this millennia, basically. So that's my background for doing this. I do a lot of web and mobile applications at work. So I kind of built a tool that I wanted to have. So I assume that a lot of you maybe know some stuff about this, but I'm just going to take it from the start so everyone can follow along. So I'm going to start by introducing the problem that we're trying to solve. So user interfaces are quite complex things, right? Because they have so many states. They exist in many states, and we only ever see one of them at a time as we're working with our developing copy or whatever. And even a simple form like the one you see on screen now can look like this, or it could look like this if you've partially filled it out and you have a validation error. And then if you try to send it in, maybe it's going to lock the fields and have a spinner on the button. And like even the most simple things in our UI has multiple visual states. And you pretty much want to make sure that all of them work all the time. But the more states you have, the more work it becomes kind of clicking around in your app to finding these states. And then you have some that are not even readily available, like a receipt you only get after you post a form. There's only so many times you want to fill out this form in a day before you get tired of it. And then maybe you have other form factors, like you have a mobile version of this thing, or maybe you have a dark mode or whatever, and you can just multiply. And seemingly simple stuff just blows out of proportion in the number of visual states you can have. So this is the problem that like Portfolio is trying to help you with. And obviously it's not the first of its kind, not by far. So I originally saw a solution for this problem with this project, which I'm guessing also a lot of you know, devcards. I don't remember when it came out, but I've been using this for many, many years. And devcards basically told you that, hey, if you have data-driven components, you can render them in a bunch of different states onto a separate page that's not your app, so that you can look at them as you're developing them. The genius idea, right? And so it's a very simple tool, but it's a very useful tool. And then the JavaScript community also got notice of this idea, and they created this project, which is basically taking the idea of devcards and running with it. And then I figured like we should have something this advanced also for ClojureScript. And that's basically why I wrote Portfolio. Or actually, the specific reason I started Portfolio is that devcards does not render in an iframe. So doing responsive design is a little bit clunky. Yes. So I'm going to show you everything you need to set Portfolio up, and then I'm going to walk you through most of its features and try to explain the like motivation behind them and show you what you can use them for. That will be the basic format of this talk. And then towards the end, I'm going to show you a more elaborate example from my daily work. So the initial examples will be quite trivial, but hopefully you'll be able to follow all the details. And I'll just throw a lot of stuff at you at the end where you won't be able to follow the details. But maybe you can see like the potential of what you can do. So let's get this thing started. Is the font size okay for everyone? Please shout if it's not. Okay, good. So first you drop in the dependency. And as you see, I'm using a Git dependency here because I added a lot of stuff to Portfolio the last couple of weeks, and I haven't had time to cut an official release with everything yet. So I'm using the Git version to have everything available. You can use this as well, but there will be an official release probably within this week sometime. So you drop this in, and then Portfolio is going to render a full screen UI. So you need somewhere for it to do that. I use Figwheel. So I typically set up a separate Figwheel build or just an extra main or whatever that can be portfolio's corner of the app. So I don't run it inside my app, run it in a separate build. And then the final thing you need to set things up is a file like this that just loads your build. And there's nothing special about this file. Portfolio will do the things that it needs to do with it, but it's suggested that you add this meta tag. I just realized that maybe Portfolio could do it for you. I'm not sure. But this basically enables the mobile view, so it works correctly. We'll see that a little bit later. And with the stuff set up, we can start using Portfolio. So I have this empty namespace, and let's go find, which looks like this at the moment. So the first thing you do is to require Portfolio UI, and then you call UI start. And this is all the setup you should need. And then it says, so yeah, welcome to Portfolio, hooray. And now we can start adding content to Portfolio. So the way that Portfolio helps you is that it displays your components in what it calls scenes. So a scene is one component with one piece of data that shows you one specific state. And you can have multiple scenes for each component. And of course, multiple components, blah, blah, blah. And what is a component? Portfolio doesn't really care. That's up to you. So you can have atomic building blocks or bigger stuff. That's up to you. We'll see different kinds during this presentation. But we'll start by working on the form that I showed you initially. So I'm going to go here and create a namespace called labeled input scenes. So it's worth noting that I created a separate folder now for all my portfolio stuff. You can put the portfolio stuff into your production code if you will, and you can have it be compiled out in production. So that's just a matter of preference if you want to have it on the side or have it alongside your production code. But I have it alongside now. Okay, and then you're going to do something like this, portfolio.star. I'll get back to that. And then you refer macros def scene. So what about the star? Well, people use different rendering technologies. So depending on which one you use, you'll plot the name in here. So we have stuff for reagent. If you're using anything that produces React components, you could say React. There's a React 18 version. There's a bunch of these. You can check the README, but they all work the same way. They all give you a def scene macro. So everything else I do today will be the same, regardless of your rendering framework. But you have to use the correct namespace here. So I use my own little thing, which is called dumdum. And then we can define a scene. And a scene is just at its most minimal, a title, empty input, and then a component. So I'll have my labeled input, label your name, and then we'll add this here. And then, okay, so now something happened that shouldn't be happening. It immediately popped up on screen here, and this is Figwheel being very helpful. If I reload this page, it's going to go away. And that's because I haven't required this namespace from my root namespace. But yeah, because Figwheel reloads it when I create it, it gets added immediately. Anyway, here we go. And so this is like the basic portfolio UI. It's rendering my input field. You might notice that it's not looking the same as it did on the slides before. And that's because I'm missing my CSS. So this file that we looked at before is not where you want to put your CSS, because this is not where Portfolio renders your components. This is where Portfolio renders its UI. So it uses an iframe to render your component. And there's a very good reason for that, but I'll show you very soon. But this also means that you have to give Portfolio your CSS files. So we can pass a map in here, config, and then I think it's called CSS paths. And my app has 2 CSS files. The core main one, and then there's a theme file like this. And then I actually have to reload the page. And now my input field looks correct. Now, even if I had to reload the page just to get it to pick up the new configuration, if you change the CSS file, it will be updated live if you use Figwheel. So I'm not sure how this works with Shadow CL.js, but I would be very interested in making that work there as well. But Figwheel is helping me automatically reload the CSS. So I have a component. Let's add another few scenes so we get to see. So I'll have, okay, we can have an input with validation error. So we'll have your email instead. There's an error. The value is some partial email. And then there might be some messages. Kind error text. Fill in your entire email. So now I have two things, and then let's just add another one for fun. I'll say disabled input here. Disabled, and then boom. Okay, so now I have 3 scenes that I can look at for the same component. And if I click the package over here, I can see all of them at the same time. So now I've kind of already improved my visual bandwidth, right? Because I can work with this component and see how it behaves in different states. So I also talked about different form factors. So it has a mobile view. And this particular component uses CSS media queries to do this. And like I said initially, that's the whole reason I started this project, because with the tool I was previously using, you'd have to resize your browser window. But there's a bunch of tools on top here. And this window tool allows you to set the viewport for your scenes. So if I choose the iPhone one, it's going to change the size. And this is why Portfolio, or this is the main reason why Portfolio uses an iframe to render the component, because now my document will observe an actual smaller window, which means that CSS media queries work, and I can use them to create responsive designs. Yes, that was media queries. And then there's since we're up here, there's a bunch of other tools as well. A few of these I stole from Storybook.JS. So you can put a grid on it if you use that. And the values that are up here are just default values. You can very easily override them. I'll show an example of that a little later. And if you're using the grid, you might want to zoom to check that things line up. And yeah, so that's those ones. Another interesting one is the background tool. So I can go here to check how this looks in dark mode. So this does not look great because my CSS is not kind of tagging along with the change. It just so this tool does 2 things. It changes the background color, and it adds a class to the body so that your CSS has a chance to kind of adapt to the change. But if you see it says dark mode, this is the default value, and my CSS file, I think I have it here, it says dark instead of dark mode. So that's a great opportunity for me to show you how you change the defaults. And this would be roughly the same for the other tools as well. But you can go in your config here and you can say background options. So we'll have 2 options, one light, title, light, value, background color. The light one is just white, and it can have a class as well. For the class light. And I'll just copy this entire thing and we'll make one for dark. And my design uses this specific color and this class. Cool. So now this menu has these 2 choices. And now it renders correctly because it sets the class name that my CSS is using. Yeah. So that's useful for that. Okay, let's get back to the light mode and the responsive stuff, because I've showed you now how you can use basically CSS media queries to do responsive designs. but not everyone uses CSS media queries. Like most of the components we have at work uses CSS in ClojureScript. So they use runtime information to do responsive designs. And so that means that we need to somehow know something about the size of this thing at the time we're rendering. So I'm going to show you now a different component I have. It's actually very similar. It's called label input 2. That's how much of an imagination I have. And this has a different implementation. It does not use CSS media queries. It's empty input 2, I'll call it. So you can see here that this does not render in a mobile friendly fashion, even though the window is small, because this particular component needs a specific data point to go in mobile. So luckily we can still make this work. Let me just increase the window. Okay, so another form of this macro is to just add in here a list of parameters. When you do that, this behaves like a function body instead. And now I can do a couple of things. So one thing I can do is to externalize the data and put it here. And you might be wondering, what did you win with that? Well, currently nothing, but now Portfolio knows about the data for my scene, which is a good thing. That means Portfolio can do good things with the data. But another thing I can do is to accept another argument in here, which is Portfolio's options for this rendering thing. And I can show you what's in that by doing this. Style, font, family, monospace. And then let's just do without stir, and then we can pretty print it. Okay, so these are all the options that Portfolio has gathered for this particular view. And it says 100% because you're getting the values that Portfolio will use to render. It's not the actual size of the window. But if you use a specific pixel number on your viewport size, then you get the specific pixel number on your viewport. So we can actually use this to trigger dynamic rendering. So let's try that. So, okay, we have this one. If that's a number, and let's see, the number needs to be smaller than 600. If that's true, then this is mobile. Like that, I think. Then let's get rid of this, and then we'll do search mobile. Something like that. Aha. So now it's a mobile view here, and I can split the screen and I can go in desktop, and now it looks good on desktop and on mobile. Pretty cool. So that's good. Okay. Now I have some code in my scene to set it up right. So if I wanted to show this second component also with the other examples, I'm going to have some duplication. So let's say if I render this one, then I'm going to take my data, put it here. And now I'm very tempted to just copy this down here. And there's nothing wrong with this, but this you're going to regret it if you want to change what's happening in that code later. So the thing we can do instead is to just extract a function. So I can say render input to scene. So I have a function that does this, and instead of calling it inside this body, you can just pass the function like this. And this, to me, is a very nice expression of what the whole point of a scene is, because it's a set of data combined with a component. And sometimes a component needs a little bit of prepping before it gets shown off by itself. But this like very clearly illustrates what the point of this is. Let me close that, and then so now I have this one. So notice this one. So okay, this is red here, black, red. I think that the other one was the other one was actually red all the way. They're different. So if you want to make sure that they are not different, maybe I want to split the screen, and then I can click this compare icon up here. And then I can select a different scene for the other pane. Aha, they're not the same. So let's just go in here and we'll find the color. It should be here somewhere. Here, it says when disabled, it should say error or error. Okay, now they look the same. Well, so the point is just to show you that you can actually have, when you split the windows, you can render different scenes in each of the different panes. And this is something you might want to use that for. Yeah. Okay. Let's power on. I don't have a good segue for this next thing, so I'm just going to show it to you. You might want to put some explanations behind some of these stuff. So you can have just like a function, you can put a doc string right after the name, and that doc string can contain markdown if you want. CSS powered labeled input. And then you can also have fancy markdown stuff like this. Yeah, I need to quote these. I need to quote these quotes. There we go. And then you get rendered some docs up here. And when you have documentation on your scenes, you get a new button in your toolbar because you might not always want to see it. So you can toggle the documentation mode off, and then it just toggles it off globally until the next time you toggle it on again. And the documentation also renders when you view all your scenes. And on that note, you'll notice that the package name here is just inferred from the namespace that I selected that define my things. If you're not happy with this name, or if you want to have like namespace level documentation, there is another macro here called configure scenes that you can call to change it. So I can give it a different title, I could just call it label input, and I can give it some docs. And then you have namespace level docs as well. Yes, that was that. Okay, so far we've seen a lot of static components that you can render into a certain mode and look at them, I guess. But what about transitions? Those happen too, right? So for transitions, you basically need some state. So to show you that, I'll create a new namespace, and I have this nice accordion component. So I'll create accordion scenes. Require, I only want that one. And we'll start with a collapsed accordion. And then I am going to mysteriously find some data. I don't want to type this all in. We don't want any content when it's collapsed. It just looks like this. And then once again, I have to go back. Every time you add a new namespace, you have to go back and manually require it here. I might come up with some solution for this at some point, but currently I'm quite happy with things being explicit. So now I get a new package here, and it looks like this. Cool. Let's add one that's that has an expanded view. So actually, this is quite a bit of data. I don't really want to duplicate it. So I'll just, I'll put it here. Okay, here's all my data. And then we're gonna add a little helper function. So we'll call it prepare items. And what I want to do is to just remove the content from all of them. So we'll do map item, this search item, content items. So now I can do prepare items data. Yes, I know. Update data items. All right, there we go. Okay, let me add another scene. So we'll have one that's expanded. It's did you know that the parts of the accordion is called a bellow? Expanded bellow. So for that, I'll have we'll just add a little thing here. Okay, so I'm taking away the content from everything now. Let's make it a little bit more discriminate. So we'll use a cond, and then we'll say, if you're not expanded, then we take the content away. And then we'll just say here, update in items 0 expanded true. Search in. So now, hopefully, yeah. So now I have one that's open. So I have one that's closed and one that's open. But these actually animate when you click them, and clicking them here does not show that. So we are going to need one that's also interactive for the user to try. So let's add another one. Def scene accordion transition, we'll call it. Okay, so now I need some state. That means I probably want to inject data from outside. So I'll say we'll do this for now, and then we'll have data in here, and then we can do almost this. So far, this just does the same as the other ones, but I can wrap an atom around here if I want. Now I have state. So if for those of you who used devcards, there's some automatic handling of atoms that it does not exist in Portfolio, but Portfolio will watch all the atoms you give it. So you can give it a map and thread like tens of atoms in it if you want to, and Portfolio will watch all of them and re-render when they change. But usually one atom should be enough for a scene. But now I have an atom, so I can do this, and now I can add a like a click handler to each item that can manipulate the state in the atom. So once again, prepare. Okay, we'll do update items, add click handler, and then I'll pass in. I like to call it store. Okay, so this is the item, and then we'll just do a search item on click, and then we'll do a swap. Oh, it's not the item, it's actually items. Okay, so we're gonna need the index here, so I'll do map indexed item items, and then we can do swap store search in items, and then expanded. I wanted to change the values. We'll use update in and say not. A little bit too long. That was a little bit fast. Hopefully you're kind of sticking with me here. But let's see now. If I click it, ooh, it expands. But you can see my little arrow over here is standing still because I forgot one thing. So let's fix that. So up here, if it is actually expanded, then I want to search in toggle rotation and -180. So now, ooh, very nice. Yeah, but the overall point here is like you can use an atom, you can put state in your scene, and then you can show transitions. This requires manual input though from a user. So if you wanted to, you could also add there's an on mount function that you can use here, and an on unmount, and they will receive the same arguments as your scene does, but there you can set up automatic transitions or whatever. You could have it like animate open close every 2 seconds, or yeah, whatever you can think of basically. So yeah, I'm not going to do that now. You get the point. So that was transitions. Let me just check my time. Okay. Let me show you one more scene here. This project also has some icons, and icons are not really components. So I'm going to create a scene for the icons, but not in the components directory. I'll just create it directly here. Icons, scenes. So I have an icons namespace. I can get all the icon IDs. We're also going to need this. Okay, I'll create a scene, icon listing. Just add some styles. I will display it in with flex, and then we'll do flex wrap and put a gap on it, and then we can render each of the items. Sorry, icons for ID. Icons render. Oh, render ID size 32. Yeah, and then I'll just go and add this to the other namespace, even though it already rendered. I'm gonna do it so I don't forget it. Okay, so now a couple of things happen. So because I added, I already had these two, and they are both components, but now I have another namespace that's like hierarchically different. I don't know how you say that, but they don't share the same namespace, right? So now Portfolio has added directories because there are more than one source of scenes. And this is just to help you organize things. And this is just also the default behavior. You can alter this and configure it in any way you want, but it gave you directories and it uses the namespace to infer names. So unfortunately, this last one got called Sasha, which is the name of the project. If you wanted to change that, you can. I can go in here and then once again, configure scenes. This will change the package. I can give it a title, but this is will change this package. But let me show you icons. But then I can also change which collection it belongs to. So it's going to belong to the icons folder. And then I can create another folder. Then I have to use portfolio data. My hope is that people won't need to use this stuff and that the default stuff in Portfolio is good enough, but this is just to show you that it's possible. So there is something called a register collection here, ID, and then you can give it a title, icon stuff. And now the folder looks like this. So the folders can be like collapsed, and this is useful when you start getting a lot of content in here. So it eases the navigation around. We didn't really see the icons though. It's yeah, there they go. Icons, not the big point. All right, one more isolated component before I show you a larger setup. And this last one will illustrate how you can work with events from users. So again, with the components, I'll create swiper scenes. So the swiper has a bunch of events. Yeah, sort of. Def scene. Swipe to delete is what I'll show you. So I have a swipe delete. It's a terrible name for a component. It has a text. Swipe me to delete me. And then a button text. Off I go. Oops. I gotta bring in the component, and then we've gotta add the namespace to our main namespace. All right. Where is it? Swiper scenes. Here we go. Okay, so now I can use my mouse to drag this thing. Maybe like this. You can swipe, right? But the point here is that this is using mouse events when you're in a desktop browser. But if you're on the mobile browser, there are no mouse events. There are pointer events. So then you need to be in an actual mobile view. And the only way to do that on the desktop browser is to enable this view. And so now I can use test pointer events as well. But the point here being that the portfolio UI was adjusted to work on mobile as well, because there are some things that you have to actually be on a mobile to test. And you could even run this on a mobile phone if you wanted to test it natively. So pointer events or mouse events both work nicely. Okay, so that's a bunch of isolated small components. I'm going to close this off by showing some stuff we've done at work. So we obviously also use it like this to look at small isolated components. There's lots of use there, but we've also started using it to render entire screens from our apps. So we have, like the components I showed you here, all our components are completely stateless. They don't have subscriptions. They don't do anything on their own. They just render stuff that you give them. That enables us to render an entire screen with just a snapshot of data. So that allows us to do this. So let me, oh, sorry. Actually, I wanted to start with this screen. So this is from an app we're building at work. This is in Norwegian. You probably don't speak Norwegian. So this is an app you can use to control your heaters and have your heaters knock off the heat when the prices are high, basically, or when you're not using your room, or yeah, so smart temperature control. So here you can see I have a bunch of things and I have multiple folders, and now we kind of see why it's useful to be able to close these things as you go. And I can basically view the entire breadth of the states of the app by just clicking down here, which is pretty useful. And interestingly, when I first set up this view, it was to help our designers and the content people that are working on translations. And when I was done setting it up, it has slowly become my most common development tool. This is basically where I do most of my work, because I don't have to uncomment code and click around and cheat to get to the states I want. I can just view them here, build a whole screen. And then I can show you also just a snapshot of the code. So here they are. You have scenes. They use onMount because the data that they receive is an atom for some state. And then there's the static data for this view. And then there's a location, which is our abstraction that tells the app what part of the app to render, basically, which page is it. And this, the atom here allows us to do some stateful things within the scene, because most of the interactions that you do here will just put data into the store, and that will cause things to render differently. So I can click this, for instance, and I can use this component here, and I can drag this, and all this will just put some data into the store. But because we are using the onMount hook to reset the store, when I navigate between these, it will always reset back to where they started, so that otherwise we would end up with stateful problems here, which is not what we want. So then we just have a bunch of these scenes that they all use the same function like before. It's just different sets of data that produce different states of the UI, which is the problem we set out to solve. Yeah. So yeah, we have a bunch of these. You can even render things like modals. We can render the modals in specific steps. And when I start at a specific step, I can click to continue. And most of the interactions in this app work, even in this isolated mode. But there's no, this is just a UI, right? So it's been disconnected from its backend and its data processing stuff. It's just the very front end. Yeah. And then, so yeah, final thing that we did. This is a relatively new feature in Portfolio, which is not enabled by default because it's not useful until you have a bit of content, but that's the search box up here. So I can show you what you need to do to get it. It's not a lot. you just do this. When you start a UI, if you give it an index, and you can create an index with tools in Portfolio, then it's going to render a search box for you. And you can search for obvious things, such like the title of the scenes, and find them. But even more useful is that, so we have translated this UI into a bunch of languages. And let's take a look at the list here. I don't speak all these languages. So we had to recruit some external help to help with that. And it's very helpful for them to understand what the context is for a piece of text. You can translate a piece of text, but you'll probably want to change it once you see what it's being used for. And the most important use of this search is for those translators to take text that they have worked with and figure out where is it being rendered. So I can go in, I can say, listo para salir. And then it says, okay, it's this view and it's in the Spanish version. And when I click it, it goes to this view, flips the language to Spanish, and here's the text I searched for. So you might wonder, why didn't it highlight it? And of course, so I still have work to do, but it finds the stuff for you, which is the important part. And the more individual states of your app you can render out, the more tools like this you can build. So I discovered, I was really frustrated. I was preparing this talk, and I wanted to find a good candidate for an example search. And I could not for the life of me understand why I could not find the text that I was looking for. And it turned out I had selected a piece of text that isn't being rendered. Like among all these screens, I selected one text that we're currently not showing. And that's why it didn't show up. So text is another one of those things that, like, there's a huge complicated matrix of states that have to align in order to see all the texts that are part of UI, right? So yeah, that was that. Yeah, so the cool thing also is that by default, when you add the search, Portfolio is going to search basically stuff in here. That's what I said before, right? If you let Portfolio know about your data, it can do interesting stuff with them. So search is one of those things. But we actually added our custom indexer here, because we can take this data, which looks like this. This is just raw data from the store. And we can render the entire UI data structure with this piece of data. I'm going to show you that because I think that's a little bit cool. So that's somewhere up here. Let's just do, okay. So if you go into Portfolio UI app, there's your app, and it has some scenes. Let's see which ones it has. I need to get one. Okay, let's grab this one. So here's my scene. Now I can pick some code up from somewhere. Sorry about that. Okay. Check this out. If I call this function, it renders the entire data structure that goes into rendering. So this is what we pass to our root component. This is everything, but it does not contain any text because our I18N system is just using placeholders like this. And this is why we're able to index it as effectively as we're doing, because it's represented as data. So I can copy more of this function from up here. Let's just do this. And then we'll do params. Those comes from the scene. And okay, so when I rendered this data structure, I can use treesec to just grab all of these, which are the I18N placeholders. And I can pipe those to our internationalization system, which gives me this. Very good. Which gives me this, which is the things that are in our dictionaries. And then you can pipe them through 3sec again just to get the text strings that's being used. So this is all the text that's being used in one specific scene. And this we can pipe into the indexer that comes along with the portfolio, and then you get full text search. I think that's pretty cool. That was a little bit on the side, but basically we've been through the things that I've thought to show you. I'll close off with, yeah, I didn't mention this, but take a look at the menu up here. It's not using any of the built-in tools. Instead, it has 2 custom menus because we have like different themes for design and different languages. So currently, these are not documented, but Portfolio has a couple of protocols and some APIs to develop custom tools. And that's been like a core idea from the beginning. The only reason they haven't been documented is that I need to be exactly sure that they're the right APIs. Because once I publish them, I will never change them, so I don't break them for you. And that's why it's taken a little bit of time to just sit on them. But they haven't changed for a while, and I probably think they're ready to go. But you can easily control which of the tools that comes with Portfolio go in here, and you can. The idea is that you should probably want to make some of your own if you want to. You can also just drop it in and use it. So that's pretty much it. I hope you found some of this stuff interesting, and I really hope someone wants to take it for a spin. And if you do, please let me know what you think. I would love to hear any criticism, or if you're happy with it, that's fun to hear as well. But yeah, basically any piece of feedback you might have. You'll find me, I have slides. Okay, so you'll find a Portfolio on GitHub, and you'll find me on the Clojurians Slack if you want to chat about anything, or if you have, if you have ideas for features or things that didn't work well for you, or if you have a different setup than me, anything is of interest. So, and I'll stick around now if people have questions, but that was pretty much my prepared material.